Political Christian family. My whole life. Had a little moment when I stopped practicing around 19, it's about 24. Came back into the faith, started rediscovering it again as an adult. Started looking up questions about the faith myself. Found the corner, came to the corner. Started like having debates because of my lovely friend Mansour and things of that nature. Now, why do I believe it's true? Well, I'll admit that when I was younger, I just thought we believe because we believe. When I came back, I found out that it's possible to actually justify the belief. Give an evidence for why we believe in the things that Jesus says, why we believe in the resurrection, and what that means for not only ourselves, but everybody else. So if you come and then possess or present any other questions to me or any other propositions.
Nice dialogue.
So if any other propositions are brought to me around, like maybe Hinduism is the way, or, Judaism or Islam, they're going to have to contend with the understanding that I have received from the church.
Okay, cool, very cool. So make sure I have a good understanding. So basically born in a Christian family, had a really nice journey, picked up the book, started looking into it a little bit more.
And you?
So for myself, I was actually born into a non-practicing Muslim family. So culturally Muslim, fell into social atheism, reverted to Islam when I was probably about 22 or so. And same thing, I put all the books there, I started reading all the scriptures, I gave everything a fair shot. I approached the issue categorically, so like for example, either one God or many gods, and then categorically I would flush things out. And then I would take a look at certain principles, like things that made sense to me that didn't make sense to me. So when I was reading my Bible, it didn't make sense to me that a God would come into a human form, experience death or need to experience death, and that be the only way for salvation. And the reason why it didn't make sense to me is because there was a chain of consistency that I saw. And the chain of consistency was with all the prophets and the messengers. And in a nutshell, there was a break in that chain, and that break to me was what I would consider a Pauline Christianity, or this needless atonement, or this payment for the purposes of forgiveness and salvation. So it didn't sit well with me because I believe in a merciful God that can give that type of mercy, give that type of reward of paradise without actually needing something from himself or anybody else. So that's kind of where I'm at. That's where my journey's at. I fell in love with what Islam had to offer as far as its simplicity, the simplicity of Tawheed. Don't really care to get into any of like the what I would consider like sub-creedal issues of Ethity, Eshedi, this, that, and the third. I think that for the benefit of anybody that's listening and for the sharing of our journeys, it wasn't impactful in my journey. So I wouldn't have anything to kind of highlight. It's not like I had this epiphany moment during these substrata or sub-branch understandings. So yeah, I'm happy to take any question you might have my way for that.
So
I'm happy to.
One thing that stuck out to me, so when I have these conversations, I pay intense attention to what the person is saying. I'm not memorizing every single thing that they're referring to, but I can have the major points that they talked about. When you were talking about your journey, opening up all the books and looking at them categorically, you mentioned two things there that struck out to me. Number one is the idea that it doesn't make sense for God to come and pay the price for human lacking in good nature or human sin.
It's bad, people being bad.
Because something doesn't make sense to you, that doesn't then mean it's automatically wrong.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, that's fine.
So, did you ever seek the proper understanding of the atonement, or the proper understanding of the crucifixion?
Yeah, absolutely. And that didn't make sense to me either.
Right. So is the problem then the teaching or how you're understanding it?
I would say the problem is the teaching.
Okay.
Because I actually made a good faith effort to try to understand what that is. So
can you talk me through it?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you would talk to what I would classify as, I mean, I guess you can consider them people of knowledge, but maybe not so much, but they're priests, preachers, church folk that you would go. I would sit down, I would have exchanges with them one-on-ones, and I couldn't reconcile certain things. I couldn't reconcile as to how God could die. I couldn't reconcile as to how he was not free from need. I couldn't reconcile as to how he would incarnate. I couldn't reconcile as to necessary. So to me, I just, when you get to a certain point, you kind of start looking at things, okay, how many angles am I really going to try to look at this at, right? So if I look at like, does it befit his majesty to come down to this creation, you know, this world that he created? Does it befit his majesty to humiliate one of his prophets, or what you would consider as a division of himself? I don't want to call it a division because I don't want to.
We don't believe in division.
No, I understand that. I don't want to. It's just for simplicity terms, right? Like, I'm not talking about partialism. I'm not talking about anything
One
like
of
that.
his persons.
Yeah, one of his persons, right?
Yeah.
Does it really require for him to do something like that?
Sure.
And I personally, I couldn't reconcile that.
Want me to answer those for you?
If you're welcome to present your worldview, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. You can definitely do that.
Okay. God can do all things that are non-paradoxical or logical, right? There's nowhere in the understanding of classical logic that the incarnation does not make sense. Now, you can argue things like, does the incarnation mean that God changes, for example? Which would contradict him saying many times that he doesn't change, for example,
Right, right.
in the Old
Yeah,
Testament.
you have the book of Hebrews,
And then we say, no, God doesn't change.
Okay.
Only thing that changes is our reality that is, within time, and God is outside of it. So the incarnation is simply, in one sentence, the divine, or God, taking on the nature of something that is temporal, aka a human.
Because let me ask you, because these are the hang-ups that I have.
Okay.
So I hope you don't mind. I'm an interrupter.
Go for it.
And if my interruption is too much, then
you said we were doing it simple, right? So just go for it. I'm going to give you any long speeches.
Perfect. So you'd said change. Right?
Yes.
So his nature doesn't change,
No,
right?
no.
Okay. So walk me through that process.
Sure.
Of what, from your worldview, what actually happened?
Sure.
Okay.
Easy.
Okay.
So just, I'm just going to use very, very simple terms. I'm not going to be very technical. So internal and external. We believe in our faith that there are certain things that are external to God and things that are internal. Internal, we would say, are things like the divine nature, all the things that make God God, and that is shared completely by the three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So these are the things that are internal, if you will, to God.
What's an example? Or something that comes to your mind?
The nature and the three persons.
But what would be something that's shared? Just so I can understand.
The divine nature.
Oh, the divine nature.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
Shared equally by all three. So that would mean that everything that applies for the Father in terms of divinity applies for the Son too.
Got it.
And then there are things that are external.
Okay.
The created universe.
Okay.
Because God isn't bound by time or space, but the universe is.
Yeah.
So when the universe comes into being, there is no change internally in God.
Okay.
Simply there was nothing outside of God, and now there is. So the change has only appeared outside of God. The same exact principle with the incarnation. No change in God, but now there is a human, like a human form or a human nature that is now also bound to the divine nature. And that doesn't represent a change in the divine nature, only a change in the human nature. It wasn't there, then suddenly it is there.
Okay, cool. So the human nature is created, and you're saying it's bound to this body, right?
Yeah, so as all human beings who have human natures, right?
Okay.
Nature are just things that we can attribute to a kind of existence.
Okay.
The nature of a tree is that it can go through like the biological life processes or whatever, but it doesn't talk, for example. It doesn't reason. Human beings have a similarity. We go through the processes of life as well, but we can reason and talk, contemplate God.
Okay, so let's continue on with that contemplation. So here's my understanding of it. When you tell me that there is an incarnation and that there is now a human nature and it's next to a divine nature, the way that my brain understands it is it went from 3 to 4. So you had 3 divine natures and you had 1 human nature.
So there's only 1 divine nature.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not understanding. That's
so
fine if there's 1 divine nature.
Remember, initially I was telling you that the things that are within God are the divine nature and the 3 persons. And the 3 persons share completely in the divine nature. So there's only 1 divine nature.
Okay. But now you've added a human nature.
Yes, and
So
the human nature is an external.
Okay, so it's part. So is the human nature internal?
No.
Is it internal or external?
Only external. Only
okay.
external.
So how did you come to that conclusion? Like how did you?
Because it is a part of the created order, which is all external.
I'm still not understanding how you actually now attribute that. So, like, let me give you an example. How would you know when Jesus is acting like a human being and when he's acting like a divine?
Right. So we, I know you might have heard different kinds of argumentation around this, right? But I think the simpler explanation is actually better. So natures are not the things that act. So when we're having this conversation, we're not having it via our human nature. We're having it by the properties of our nature. So, for example, our ability to like have intellect and communicate. So you are a person who has a nature, but it is your person who is having the conversation or doing the action.
Okay.
So
let me ask you.
in addition to the question, when Jesus does an action, we can say it's via his divine nature or via his human nature. But we don't really say that, oh, like he's waking up. Oh, that's the human nature waking up. Or he's going to bed. That's the divine nature doing it. The person is committing the actions. But then the natures by which they can draw from to do so can be different depending upon the action.
Yeah, and I'm saying that you're going to have to attribute it to one or the other. And the reason being is because when you're talking to me, it's not your speech that's accruing the sin. It's you as a person that's accruing the sin if you're doing something bad, right? So, like, if you yourself are going out committing crimes, you don't go, oh, my hand did that.
Okay.
You say, I did that.
Sure.
Your hand is not going to go to court. You are going to go to court.
Sure.
So what I'm saying is you actually have to attribute it to one nature.
No.
One or the other.
To be simple, not necessarily. So, for example, you stabbed me, right? You stabbed me with your hand. It wasn't with your toe, right?
Absolutely.
So, in the same capacity, we can attribute any actions that Jesus does to the person of Jesus. For example, Jesus walked on water.
Yes.
The ability to do so was given by his divine nature.
Yeah, but his person consists of two.
So he's one person
And
with
then-
two natures.
Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah.
My point is now you have to reconcile that. So you have to
And that's
reconcile
how.
what. Yeah, but that doesn't solve the issue.
It does.
It doesn't. I'm telling you, when is he doing one and when is he doing the other? So for
Okay.
example, look.
I can answer that very, very simply.
No problem. Let me give you a critical point. So
Okay.
here's the critical junction.
But you asked two questions. So you asked the first one, and then you asked the second one.
No, I'm continuing on with
Okay.
the first.
So when is he?
Yeah,
That's fine.
that's still a continuation.
Sure.
And I'll bring it to the critical junction.
Okay.
So when it comes to atonement, when it
Okay.
comes to self-sacrifice for the purposes of atonement,
Sure.
is his divine nature taking it upon the sin, or is his human nature taking the sin?
Right. So natures don't do things, persons do.
Yeah, and
Right.
I'm trying to tell you,
Okay.
his person consists of two natures.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, so now, if his person is taking on the sin, his personhood consists of. Did you basically? Here, I'm gonna just cut to the chase. Did a human being die? Or
Yeah.
Did God die?
So God died. Yes.
Okay, so God
Right?
died. So the
Yes.
divine nature died.
No.
Okay,
No.
see, this is what I'm
so
saying.
so don't forget that.
difficult to-
No. So God
Yeah.
dies on the cross, right? And that's fine. We can say that. And the reason we can say that is because natures are not the things that perform actions. People do. So when
What makes a person?
Huh?
When you say,
Oh,
I don't mean to cut you
a
off, again, but
person?
you're saying terms
So-
that are interchangeable. So when you
no,
say people,
natures and people are not interchangeable. So, for example, that tree has a nature, but it's not a person.
okay, but
Yeah.
this person is a human being.
Sure. So it's
Human being
yeah,
consists
with a
of
human
a
nature.
human nature.
That's correct. Yes.
And now you're saying this person is a divine being, and that brings me back to the original point.
Yep, because
the issue is you don't know
Jesus-
who took on the sin, the human being or the divine being. If you're saying the divine being took on the sin, in my mind's eye, a divine being can't die.
Okay.
And you're saying God died.
Yep.
Okay, and
And-
I'm having a difficulty reconciling.
Sure thing. And so again, I will reiterate that when an action is committed, it is not done by a nature; it's done by a person. So Jesus, we can say, is a divine person. And just to describe what a person is, something that exists that has intellect and will.
Okay.
That's how come you can't call, like, a cat a person, right?
So there's, if I'm understanding
Yep.
you correctly, there's two wills.
Yes, two wills.
Oh, you have a human will and a divine will.
Absolutely.
Inside one person.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yep. And
then-
that can only be done by God.
Okay. So, and why do you say that?
Yeah?
Why do you say that?
No,
Why do you say there's two wills? I'm sorry. Just to clarify, why do you say there's two wills?
because wills are things that are proper to a nature. So when you have a human nature, you also have a human will, and vice versa with a divine nature.
Okay, great. So if there was two natures and two wills,
Yep.
which will and which nature was praying to the Father?
Right. So we say that, for example, when he talks to the Father, right, he talks to the Father by his person, not by his will. And I think that's something you keep mixing up. The person is doing the action, not the will doing the action.
Brother, you told me that there's two natures, two wills. One of those wills had to have a volition to actually conduct the action to pray.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm asking you, which one of those is it?
Right.
It can't be neither, and you can't say person, because then you're going to say both of them have the same will.
Right.
Now you're going to run into an issue where the human will and the divine will are one. And you just told me they're two.
No, not that they're one. Simply because you agree with something doesn't make you one. We can have the same opinion on for example, our favorite snack, but that doesn't mean that we have the same person. We simply agree with something we simply agree with a topic that's external to ourselves.
Yeah,
so
I think that's a tough
prayer.
That's a tough analogy, man.
It wouldn't be, because prayer. So, for example, there are things that you can do as a Muslim that align with the will of Allah, right? But that doesn't make you an Allah one. So
I can never do anything against the will.
Well, you can, because you can sin. Okay, well,
no, it's within His will for us to sin.
Oh, okay. Well, that's problematic in a completely different way. But we'll get into that.
But okay, yeah, we can.
Well, basically, if I like, so. Okay.
It's not problematic.
It's very problematic depending on how you interpret it.
Okay.
So, to make it very simple, are you saying that if Allah does not will a thing to occur, it cannot occur?
It will never happen. Ever. And see, this is why I love about being sincere and I don't like. And I love this conversation,
right?
Because now we're actually making beautiful progress. It can never happen.
So, if I kill you right now and start eating your innards,
it was within His will.
Allah wanted me to do that.
No, not wants. What He wants and what He willed is completely different. See, this is the thing. When you will, when you're talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will, it's all the possibilities of what can happen. Right now, you could literally gouge my eyes out, do all the weird things. Not saying that that's going to happen, man, but
hypothetically,
that's all within His will. But let me give you a very concrete example. Can you jump 10 feet in the air right now?
No, without some kind of assistance.
Exactly. So it is within His will that you cannot do it without some assistance. It's as simple as that. So
you're the way I'm interpreting this, what you're calling Allah's will is just possibilities.
Absolutely. If it's outside of His will, it's not in the realm of possibility. So
I mean, there's a better way of describing that outside of His will, because it's actually, I mean, from a Christian position, right? We say that will is something akin to ability to action a thing, right? So the way you were describing it at first, I assumed you were saying that the things that occur are decreed by Allah to occur in that way. So if I was to eat you, that's because Allah wanted me to do so. But you're implying that effectively Allah's will is just a infinite number of potential actions that a person can do.
Yes. So when you say wants, you're adding the element of desire in there, and that's not okay.
Allah has no desire?
I can't. I'm not going to use that type of language. Okay. So I don't know what's in Him. So for example, did He want to create? Yes, because we're here. He had a choice of create, not create,
sure,
and we're here. So I can comfortably say He wanted to create.
Okay.
But if He wills for something to happen, it's within the realm of possibility of it happening. Now you have a choice. So what He wanted was for you to have a choice, and otherwise you're just going to say, hey, life is completely useless and we have no choice. And
some Muslims are occasionalists, and that's what they believe.
Yeah, I'm a compatibilist, man. I think that He gives us all these possibilities. He gives us guidance towards good. I think the more good that you do, the consequences is more good and better guidance, stronger guidance, tougher exam. To stay on top of the deen, to stay on top of the truth. Like for example, when somebody does perpetually good. Let's say, for example, when I think of Surah Al-Fatiha, right? And when we recite that, you're asking to be on the Sirat al-Mustaqim, right? The righteous path. But to me, when you're reciting the Quran, you're being elevated. So you're trying to get closer to God. And the more of the Quran that you know, the more of the teachings of Islam that you know, you have more to lose if you start to go on the opposite end. So for example, if you end up murdering somebody, God forbid, or you end up falling off the bandwagon, you are going to fall a great distance compared to someone that just now accepted Islam and is making a mistake of ignorance or a mistake of something that they're, like a cardinal mistake that just didn't quite hit their head. So my point being is, the more knowledge that you have, you're going to be held to that different standard of account. And the more guidance is given to you by the will of Allah. But also your test is increased because the more you have to refrain from doing things. So all of that is within his realm of possibility. All of that is within his will, but the choice is yours.
So is there some kind of compatibilism between Allah's will and what he wants? So in terms of creation, he wanted to create, but before that he willed to create. He doesn't want to create, then will so. He wills so and then does it, right?
No, I think so. What happens is, classically, I think this is a human thing. It's not even like a Christian thing or anything like that. I think as human beings, we tend to look at things like linearly, like he was here and then went there. I don't think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala works in that framework. Like, to put it simply, I don't think he has to think about creating and then he creates, because he knows all possible outcomes and all possibilities. And like you said, he's not time bound, he's not space bound, and he's looking at things both all from past, present, and future. So it's really like tough to use that language. Rather, so that's why I don't like to say, oh, he willed it first, then he took the action, or he thought about it first.
Even like logically speaking, because for us, we can say that, for example, we believe in two main processions in God: the procession of the will, sorry, of the intellect,
Okay.
and then the procession of the will. Okay. So that's what we call the Son and the Spirit.
Okay.
And the reason why, logically speaking, we say that the Son emanates and then the Spirit, despite them not being bound by time, is that logically speaking, before you can will something, you have to know things. So the intellect comes and then the will. Logically speaking, at least.
I see what you're saying.
So in that sense, in creation,
I totally see what you're saying. I would say that you have to take it even a step further. You have to will the knowledge first before the will to existence. You understand what I'm saying?
How can you will when you don't know anything yet?
Well, because you have to start somewhere. There has to be
So the knowledge will come first and then the will afterwards, because you have to know all the possible worlds.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying it's not appropriate for us to step into what God's mind is, because we simply don't know.
Well, God's mind is logical. We have to agree with that,
right?
But
logic to what standards? If you're logic in this realm, and then you go to logic in the quanta realm, it's completely different. So
right.
Logic in his realm is befitting his majesty.
Right.
And I can't speak to that because I'm not in that realm.
Right. So logic in the quantum realm doesn't get thrown away suddenly. Well, no, there's just different assertions that we have to make in the quantum realm. For example, like things that are paradoxical.
Yeah, you would consider them illogical in this realm.
Right.
And the logic changes over there.
But
you've seen The Matrix, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's part of the quantum realm. You're just like, there's no way a guy could be bending bullets and dodging things at light speed.
Well, he could if like gravity works differently, but that's not illogical. Because we already know that in different parts of our universe, gravity works differently.
Yeah, but I'm trying to.
So it's not logical.
I'm trying to. What I'm trying to say is to hypothesize what's in his realm. There's no benefit for me. There's no benefit for you either. It would be like me trying to get into your head. I can't even do that, man. Let alone like to get into God's head, for lack of a better word.
You've heard about like the paradox of the rock. Can God make a rock so heavy he can't lift? Blah 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 blah.
Sure, yeah,
things of that nature, right? Right. But then like the way that you're putting this, it's almost possible that maybe if you believe in like different degrees of logic based upon what dimension you're in, then I can say it could be possible that within Allah's dimension he can do that.
No, because you have like assumptions and certain presuppositions. Like for example, if we go with the rock but can't lift, you're assuming that there's physical strength involved. You're assuming that the rock is made of some type of a material form that you're familiar with. You're assuming that up is up, and it can just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. There's all these, like, you're assuming that the rock has a molecular composition, like an atomic mass. You're assuming all these things.
So within Allah's realm, we know.
I don't speak of it.
Well, for example, we have descriptors of it. There's water, there's a throne,
Yeah,
So
again,
whatever,
it's not like raw water.
sure. So whatever reality the water on the throne has, I'm gonna imagine the rock has the same reality.
Yeah, but you don't know what reality the water has.
That's fine.
And so that's why we
whatever
can't imagine
reality
the
it
rock.
is, well, no, we can imagine a rock, right? But a rock with, I'm gonna say a rock with similar properties to what the arch of the throne has.
I can't speak to that because now what you're saying is tell me about the composition of the throne, and I just don't.
Oh
know.
no, I'm not asking for it. I'm just saying that I am not appealing to things that are necessarily physical. But there are things in heaven or within the Islamic concept that at least sound in some sense to be physical. But even if they're metaphysical thrones, can there be a metaphysical rock that Allah can't lift if He has a different operation of logic than we do?
I don't use that type of language, bro, because like
just hypothetically.
There's no point in going that way.
So then
I'm saying like it's not going to change. It's not going to change what's required of me by God on what I'm capable of doing. Like for example, it would be silly for him to set that type of a requirement to obtain that type of knowledge when he himself in the Quran says that when it comes to that realm, the realm of souls, he knows. So the requirement is.
But then he gives us the scriptures of it.
Yeah, but the scripture also gives certain parameters, right? So like for example, what you're talking about is things that are in the hadith and things that are within the Quran. But then both of those contain parameters, brother. So when they contain those parameters, he tells us at certain points, stop. Otherwise, you're just going to be going off of conjecture. And I'm saying that there's no benefit to either you or me to talk about the conjecting elements. Like, it's cool. It's cool because
I don't believe that parameter is ever put on the throne.
It is. It 100% is.
I don't think so.
Yeah, it is. Nowhere does he say, hey, you need to know what the throne is.
But he also doesn't say don't question the throne either. I mean, he says
but he tells us not to question the realm of souls. And if that belongs in that realm, then he said you gave us but a little bit of knowledge.
Well, so in the divine cosmology of Islam, the throne is above the heavens.
Yeah, but,
so it's not actually contained within the realm of souls.
How do you know that?
Because the idea is that Allah sits above His throne, which is above the water, which is above the created order.
Yeah, you're gonna have to prove that.
That's your
you're gonna
hadith.
have to prove that it's not within the realm of souls. You're gonna have to prove all.
Well,
and I'm saying,
if it was within the realm of souls, remember earlier when you agreed with me that God isn't time bound. The realm of souls is within the created order.
So again, you're conflating this material terrestrial.
No, the realm of souls.
I understand what you're trying to say.
It's created, yeah.
You're trying to say that it is created, and yes, absolutely. The only thing uncreated is the Creator Himself. Okay.
And the Quran, apparently.
Well, again, you're gonna don't do this, bro. Because this is not. We can go down that route, bro, but you're just going to end up like all these other conversations where they're regurgitated. And like I said, I care about your journey, and I care about you as a human being, and I care about. Would you
like to backtrack to the incarnation, or?
No, I think we're having a beneficial conversation, but I'm saying like ask questions as to, that things that you can actually, like for example, things that would get you closer to the Creator on what He actually revealed.
All right.
I think that's where
I'm always happy to talk about Jesus.
Alhamdulillah, bro. I love Him as my prophet, as my messenger. I love Him as the Messiah to the Jews. I love Him as, I love Him as a truth speaker. I love Him as an example for the people of their time. I love Jesus, bro. And, I'm glad you do too. So I'm glad we have this thing in common.
What do you love about Him?
I love what He taught. I love that He taught that there's only one Creator. I love that.
Where are you getting that from?
John 17:3. That's probably, when I was reading the Bible, that was the most impactful verse to me.
Have you ever read John 17:1-10?
Yeah, I have.
What did you think about that?
What I did notice when I read the book of John, bro, is I noticed that there was ample times that Jesus was called a prophet.
Which is fine.
It is fine. So now.
But I can call you like a man. But is that all you are? Yeah, you might be a husband or a father, right? There's many other things that you can.
Contextually speaking, what was going on during these verses, and I'm not going to explore like every single verse.
You probably should actually.
Well, there's no need for me to.
Do you want to look at John 17 again? I think it's important.
What would you like to look at?
Well, in verse 5, he talks about having pre-existent glory with the Father.
Great. all the prophets had pre-existing glory.
How does that work when they don't pre-exist?
They do pre-exist. So for example, when it says that he created God in his image, okay, the way that I understand that...
Created God in his image or created man?
Thank you for that. He created man in his image. I view that as he created man in his imagery, meaning that God, and again, I'm not imposing this is just my human understanding, is that he has a mind. He has the ability to think, like volition. He has the ability to conjure whatever he wills, right? And part of that is the imagery of man. 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 ears, a nose, 2 eyes, some hair, sometimes lacking. Mashallah, you got good hair.
For now.
So I'm a little jealous.
Well, we'll see. We'll see.
But my point being is that they were all, and even you were in pre-existence, in his imagery, in his knowledge. So you were sent at a particular time, which is today, right? Today you would be X years old and you'd be living X life. But in his knowledge, you always existed. So
I don't think that's a good idea.
Okay. So if that's the case, then you would have to prove how God is not all knowledgeable.
Okay.
Because you had to have been in his knowledge bank, just for the simple terms, and then you were manifested in time.
So God doesn't have a knowledge bank, right?
So what does he got?
So this is another problem within the Islamic understanding of God's knowledge, right? Because the problem is within Islam, you guys give Allah the opportunity to learn new things. You do actually. There's a very popular argument about Surah 3, verse 140, where it says that Allah may know. It's rendered in a few other ways, but one of the ways is Allah may know. The term is, I think, like a waliyama or something is the idea. And there have been arguments about how Allah's knowledge works as a result of that verse.
I don't hold that position. I hold the position that he's all knowledgeable at all times.
Meaning what exactly?
There is no thing that he doesn't know of, that he's not aware of, or possibility that he doesn't know of, or he's not aware of.
He doesn't learn anything.
How could you be all knowledgeable and learn? That would just be silly, man.
Okay, well,
I think that, at least for me, I'm like,
fair enough.
That sounds nuts.
Fair. I can show you some Quranic verses if you want to see where Allah sort of talks in this slightly ambiguous way, like when he talks to Moses and tells him, "Go to Pharaoh. Perhaps he might listen." Perhaps to us sounds like maybe.
Brother, that's rhetoric.
Rhetoric.
It's a form of rhetoric. When you say, so, like, for example, imagine if let's say, when you read that, when you say that, I think of, you'll see. I already know, but you'll see.
But so
perhaps
the issue with that is that is a almost Americanized English expression.
That's what it is.
Does it exist in like ancient Arabic?
Yeah, think about that. That's a question for you, not for me, because I don't have an issue with it.
Well, so for example, like in the Bible, right, or even in the Quran, we have that term of the rich man, or it's more difficult for a rich man to enter heaven than for a camel to pass the eye of a needle. We don't use that term anymore. We use things like, when hell freezes over, or when pigs fly, right? So how do you know that perhaps in the Arabic is rendered in the same way as you'll see?
Yeah, because you have to look at it comprehensively, right? So, like, if you hold the position that he's all knowledgeable, then by default, it will give you that context cue. So, if you understand and accept that he cannot learn anything more, there would be no other alternative by default. That's how I would view it, bro. Just simply taking that position of, like, because if you can add to a cup, then it's in need of something. It's not fully pure. It's not fully. You know what I'm saying? And
what I would then do is, like, it's for lack of time, I would encourage you to have a look at the debates around Surah Al-Imran, verse 140, and you'll see you can watch the videos again. You should see it around. But people do debate this around what God's knowledge is. So for us, we hold that God is pure acts, right? So God doesn't have any potential, right? He doesn't have any past or any future. And when he looks at his creation, he looks at it all in one glance. So effectively, past, present, and future are in his purview all at once. and his knowledge isn't one where it can increase or decrease.
That sounds
because in all possible worlds, we hold that God knows the things that are created by understanding the form of the thing without actually becoming the thing.
That sounds
Right?
great. That's great, man.
I don't believe so. When you just talk now about pre-existing in the knowledge bank of God, we don't hold that, because that ascribes that there was some passage of time before we were actualized, that God had us in His thinking before He made us, and we don't hold that.
Yeah. So.
So that's why when I said with Jesus, right, that He has pre-existent glory with the Father.
Okay.
Pre-existence implies without creation.
So a couple things come to mind.
So that's why,
God bless you.
John 17:5.
So check this out. A couple things. One, if you hold to the view that He doesn't need to take form of a creation to either have
To understand it.
understand it, right? Then if that's the case, then He would never have to take human form.
So He doesn't take human form to understand us. He takes human form to redeem us.
Right. So let me put a clarifying nuance on there. He would not have to take human form to understand sin and how to rectify it.
No, He doesn't take human form to understand sin either. He takes human form for the express purpose of saving us from sin. So there is no necessary learning of the mission when He's here on earth. He already comes with the understanding of the mission.
Okay.
So He's not learning anything to help Him on the mission.
Okay. So curious then, why didn't He do that earlier to the previous generations if your position is that the way that He understands sin is to actually
redeem our human nature.
But through incarnation and sacrifice.
Sure. So for the sacrifice portion, I was going to bring it up earlier actually, when you talked about reading, for example, the Torah and not seeing the consistency with sacrifice in the New Testament. The Torah is all about sacrifice. The Levitical laws talk endlessly about different weekly, daily, monthly, annual sacrifices. Right. So we're not saying Jesus. That's why we talk about Jesus in this motif of Him being a lamb, or the sacrificial lamb, or the Passover lamb. Right. Now, spiritually, what we told in Christianity that the things that happen physically in the Old Testament have a spiritual rectifying in the New. That's the explanation behind Jesus saying, I have not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. So fulfillment means completion. The law is pointing towards a savior and salvation, first with the Jews, and then, as Abraham was promised, his descendants, the Jews, would be a light to all the nations. And all would come to worship the true God because of the promise that God had made to Abraham. So it's Abraham, the Jewish people, then the rest of the world. That's how it works, right? So if you're starting up...
So why did He change the way that He actually delivers the redemption?
Because
before it used to be animal sacrifice. Then it changed to human. Now let me add this caveat as well. If you read the book of Ezekiel, the third temple is going to be built. And then Jesus is going to be actually offering sacrifice for Himself.
I don't believe.
I'm not going to mess with you on that.
If you want to bring that up,
feel free. Check out. I think it's Ezekiel 44.
Does it say the Lord will sacrifice to the Lord?
Yes, it does. That's the issue. And so, but here's what I would rather.
All right.
I'm not going to stick on that.
I kind of want to finish the whole conversation.
But it went from animal to human, back to animal. Why? If He already understood sin, why would He now all of a sudden need to change how He's getting rid of it?
If you have a citation for the verse, I can read it for you and give you an answer.
Chapter 44 onwards. I want to say it's from 44 to...
We can have a look at it.
For you.
I can bring it up for you in a second. But the understanding is that there is in the New Testament, you're seeing these things fulfilled spiritually. So what you're having there isn't necessarily just a mere human sacrifice. What you're having is the lamb mentioned in the Old Testament being fulfilled in the person of Christ, who is a person of God. And so because the lamb only offers what you would call temporal bereavement of sin, There's weekly, monthly, annual sacrifices that have to be done on a recurring basis. The Lamb of God, Jesus, is a final, an ultimate sacrifice, right? The sacrificing of the Son, similar to the motif of the binding of Isaac, for example, in the Old Testament. So that's why you're seeing that. And the thing that's being done there is there's a need to repair a broken human nature. It was perfect for what it was supposed to do in the beginning. So God is perfect in a way that God is perfect in. And human beings were made perfect in a manner that would allow their nature to fulfill the telos, or the purpose of what God made them to do. We lost that perfection, that human perfection. And since we've lost it, that's why the world suffers, and that's why we make each other suffer. So what is promised to us is that this will be rectified at some stage. And you can read about this in Romans.
If he was the last lamb, then why would they rebuild the temple and then continue the sacrifice?
So remember how Jesus in the New Testament says to the disciples that knock this temple down and I will rebuild it in 3 days, or I will raise it again in 3 days. So we actually hold that the physical temple being talked about in the Old Testament is actually spiritually fulfilled in Christ. So Christ is the temple people will come to worship at.
But he himself is going to be making sacrifices for himself as well.
Right. So you're reading it in a literal sense, but
that's what it says.
Well, there are many things that are said literally in the Old Testament that have a spiritual fulfillment. So we have like multiple ways in which we understand Old Testament prophecy. Some are literal, yes, but some can be moral. They can be analogical.
But this is New Testament.
Yeah. So, okay, for example, let me give you an example, right? So, Moses in the wilderness at one point lifts up a serpent, a bronze serpent, right? To heal the Israelites because they have been cursed with serpents by God for turning their backs on God while they were in the desert, right? Now, this sounds like, okay, fine, so this is some weird, like pagan symbology stuff, right? Actually, funny enough, that's the reason why you have the snake on the back of ambulances. It's from that story. Now, Jesus in the New Testament tells us that until the Son of Man is lifted up, like Moses picked up the serpents in the wilderness, then those who look upon him will be healed and achieve eternal life in the same way that people looked upon the serpent in the wilderness and were healed. So you have these two like random events, or one random event, and it being somehow spiritually fulfilled in the new. So Jesus, for example, is not a bronze serpent on a stick.
So was there?
But the motif is put on him on the crucifixion.
Right, and I'm fine with that. Mm-hmm. I understand that from your worldview.
Yep.
Now, continuing on with that, if it was fulfilled, why rebuild the temple?
Right.
Why continue the sacrifices for the purposes of removal of sin? Because it was already fulfilled.
So what I would say now is, again, I haven't read the verse, but from what it sounds,
it's a great one where we can continue.
I'll check it out.
Yeah.
From what it sounds like to me, I can argue that this is fulfilled in number one, the death of Jesus, the resurrection, aka the building of the third temple, and the sacrifice that he's committing in what you describe in Ezekiel is the sacrifice he made on the cross.
Okay,
so I can rationalize it that way.
It specifically says that he's going to sacrifice a bull. So it's going to be, and that was my original question, is why is it going from animal to personhood? I'll respect that from your worldview, personhood, all the way back to animal. And that's the contention.
I think the issue is you're literalizing that, because, for example, Christians, for example, don't hold that a third temple structure is required. For example, we see that
against the Bible.
Well, we're not going against it. We have the proper understanding of what that terminology means. So in Luke 24:27, Jesus is shown to unroll the Torah or Tanakh for his disciples. And he gives them, in the Greek, he gives them the proper interpretation of what these things mean. So whereas you're reading it and looking for a literal one-to-one with what is in Ezekiel, often there are many things in Ezekiel that are hyperbolic. For example, when it talks about the wheels.
The crystal clear text.
Right.
It has no ambiguity to it whatsoever. And then it says that he will sacrifice for himself as well.
So
and
tell
that
me,
means he's not sinless.
Tell me why that has to be fulfilled physically. when I've given you examples of things that are physical and are spiritual.
How would a bull not be physical?
So if a bull represents, for example, a sacrifice for the atonement of sin in accordance with the Levitical law.
Yeah, but they physically sacrifice them.
And then spiritually, or morally, it is then showcased in the New Testament as a different action.
Yeah, so my point being is the physical act was still conducted. And then the spiritual reward was sought after, right? I mean, that's the whole point, right?
In the old. But in the new, the action isn't required anymore. Because for example, think about it. The Gentiles, right, are not forced to sacrifice animals to God if they don't want to.
Yeah, but understand, he's gonna, when they rebuild that temple, he is the high priest. So he is going to be the one that is going to be standing at the sepulcher, and he is going to be saying, this is the sacrifice, and he is going to be sacrificing a particular thing.
But Jesus himself is the temple.
No.
Yeah?
He's the...
I can show it to you.
Okay. And I think this is where we have a difference.
Okay.
Which again, I'm
so
happy to have that difference.
What did Jesus mean when he said...
How is he physically going to be in the temple if he is the temple?
Exactly, right?
Okay.
So that tells you... No, he is the high priest forever.
No.
Right?
What you're doing is...
There's no physical structure.
I'm going to tell you
that's the
I'm going to
problem.
tell you why you need to look into it. And this is with all due respect.
Okay.
Because in Ezekiel, it actually talks about a physical structure.
And tell me why that's going to be fulfilled in a spiritual way.
What do you mean by in a spiritual way?
So, aka in a non-physical way.
Okay. Because when you read the text clear as day,
okay,
a physical high priest will be there. Otherwise, there's no point in rebuilding the temple. How are you going to rebuild the temple if Jesus was the temple? How are you going to rebuild Jesus?
Oh, so that happens when he dies and resurrects, which is why he says, knock this temple down and I will raise it again.
So who's the bull?
So the bull is a sacrifice. And Jesus himself was the sacrifice on the cross. So he fulfills all the prophecies. And that's how we are taught to do this in tradition.
You're blending the two.
Well, you need to give me a reason as to why it has to be physical.
I did. Because...
So what you're doing is you're appealing to the text and you're saying the text is implying a physical building, so why am I not seeing one?
No, it's concrete. It's not implying, it is legitimately saying that it is going to be a temple. It is going to have pillars. Okay, so for example, let's table that for just a second. You believe in a second coming, right?
Sure.
So is Jesus still the temple?
Yes.
How are they going to rebuild him?
So that's what's already happened in the resurrection.
There's a second coming.
Yep.
So why would they be building that physical temple if the second coming is happening?
So, funny enough,
who's the bull?
Funny enough, actually. So,
this is what
notice that it's not Christians attempting to build a second temple. You might have some.
It's fine.
You might have some radical American evangelists, but it's a Jewish.
How you being on the Americans, man? Give them a break.
I'm not.
We're in London.
I'm just kidding. I'm just saying. So you might have some Jews, for example, who want to, like what you're essentially doing, fulfill the prophecy physically, right? But then there's a problem with they're not really having a high priest.
New Testament.
No, exactly, right?
So it's Ezekiel, New Testament.
No, Ezekiel's old, but you're asking me a question, why are they building a third temple? The reason is they are literalizing it in the way you are. That's why. Because they lack the context of the New Testament. That's why. And oh, by the way, if you read Ezekiel, I remember if you this was Ezekiel, right? Ezekiel is a very it's a very spiritual book because a lot of the things that he sees in his visions, right, are literally out of this world. Look up Ezekiel's wheels, for example, if you want to have an interesting read on that. In one of the verses, it talks about these wheels that come out of heaven that are on fire, and the wheels have eyes, and the wheels intersect with other wheels.
That can all be very metaphoric.
So why is that metaphoric, but the temple isn't?
Because you're asking for something that can actually be a physical structure, and then you're asking for.
Well, why can't wheels of fire come out of the sky? Well, what stuff that's happening?
Well, they can. Yeah, they can. There's nothing.
And also, I believe in Ezekiel, he describes the coming of the new kingdom, and in the new kingdom, he describes these gemstones that are on the floor, paved in the entire floor. Do you expect that when the new kingdom comes, there will be legitimate gemstones on the floor? It could be a metaphor for, oh wow, it will be shiny and grand. right?
Yeah, very well could be.
So we understand that in the Bible, not everything is meant to be read literally. Because, for example, like in the Old Testament, in the Psalms, God is called like a rock and a shield, right? And like a mighty man of war.
I don't think he's a rock or a shield or a mighty man.
And then we understand that those things aren't literal. Okay, so we have basically means by which, or hermeneutical means of interpretation that we use for different bits of the Bible, right? And yes, we can make up our own, but it's better, in my personal opinion, if some of these interpretations can be found somewhere in like church history. If you read any like patristics, or if you read like any like commentaries on like Daniel or Mark or whatever by any early fathers or bishops or whatever, yes, there are some things that they might say that are not completely accurate, right? However, it's good to see if your understanding is like the old understanding. Well, that's what
I think when you step into your worldview, of course it'll be whatever your understanding is. I guess
sometimes I can be wrong.
Yeah,
which is the problem.
and again, that's fine. It's just the disconnect that I'm having is how it's going from one to the other, back to the other, and then the root of the issue.
You're literalizing it almost as if that you're like a Tanakh observing Jew without the New Testament story. That's why I think you're confused.
Well, then wouldn't it be fair that if it was revealed to the Jews that we would understand it the way they understood it?
So,
like that, you know what I mean?
Are you talking about Ezekiel or the New Testament?
If Ezekiel is interpreted by the Jews as literal, then why not?
Because we hold that the greatest teacher of the Torah isn't a particular rabbi that you can name from the Jewish tradition, but that it is Jesus, because he is the one who gives the scripture in the first place. He is that angel of the Lord who Moses talks to on Sinai, who gives him the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, that's kind of strange to me, man.
Why?
But I'm not a Jew, so you don't have to worry about that.
Oh yeah. No, Jews have their own means of interpretation, sure, absolutely. But then there are certain inconsistencies that they fall into, certain things that they don't necessarily want to discuss or throw to the wind. Like, for example, that angel of the Lord I talked about. The angel of the Lord is a very interesting figure in the Old Testament because it basically does the actions of God and bears the name of God. And so the way that they interpret that is like, I find interesting but unsatisfactory. But hey, they won't care what I say.
Yeah, they won't care. They won't care what I say either.
Nope.
Yeah. So I guess, I mean, it seems like you had mentioned, we have a lot of those commonalities. I think, we talked about it a little bit a while back, but we were talking about the knowledge bank of God, and I said, for lack of a better word.
Okay.
But the idea is that you are also in that pre-existence, meaning you were in that realm of souls.
So I am created, right? Meaning that I didn't have an existence, and then now I do, right? Exactly. So me being created has no bearing on the knowledge of God. Because like I told you, in our conception, God sees our entire reality in a singular glance, right? Now, before I am created, or we hold, at the point of conception, that is when the soul of a human being is created. It doesn't flow from a dimension into...
That's from your world.
Yes.
Okay.
It doesn't flow from one dimension into another. It is created in that instance as well.
Got it.
So because interestingly, the idea of us like existing in a different realm before we enter this one is actually like a Platonic idea. Okay, Plato believed in in the pre-existence of the soul. So the soul comes from the world of ideas into the world of he called this world the world of like shadow or appearances.
I've read his works too.
Yeah. And then when we come in, we forget everything from the world of like perfection, and then we have to do philosophy to remember it again.
Yeah. Okay. So how do you explain Adam?
What about him?
He was obviously created before the earth.
No, he was the last thing to be created.
So Adam was never...
Sequentially, he was the last thing to be created.
So do you believe that Adam was not created in the heavens?
No.
You believe he was created on earth?
In the garden, yes.
Okay, where is the garden?
The garden is no longer accessible to human beings.
No, but where is it? Is it on the earth or is it outside of the earth? So,
this is actually very, very interesting. So, the garden isn't necessarily a physical location. The garden is actually, or if you look at it from the garden to the temple to Jesus, the garden is supposed to be an intersection where the divine and creation actually interact with each other.
So a different realm.
Not a different realm. Some place in this realm that we will go back to at the end of days. So the idea is that it's a space where God can interact with humanity in an almost direct fashion, which is why you hear verses in Genesis like God walks through the garden in the cool of the day, that kind of thing. Then the garden is closed off to humanity when Adam and Eve are kicked out. The Bible describes that God places swords there to guard against anyone entering, because in that garden there is the tree of knowledge and evil and the tree of life and death. Now, that intersection again then gets copied, or the idea gets transferred to the idea of a temple. But now, not everyone can go in. Only the ritually clean Levites can go in.
Okay, so see, the way that we understand it in Islam is
it was here, kicked
Allah
out, down.
Created, you have the other realm, the heavens, right? Adam and Eve were created there. Before them were the angels. Okay, and also before humankind, you have
Oh,
jinn.
that's better. Okay.
Yeah, it's a little better.
Yeah, my eyes were dying. Yeah.
So the idea now is that two things. One, in his knowledge, all possibilities existed, and all true possibilities started to take place. Meaning, at one point in time, there was no angels, and then there were angels. At one point in time, there was no jinn, and there was jinn. At one point in time, and this is again just for simplistic terms, not saying in time, but at one point, okay? Then Adam and Eve, first Adam, and then Eve from Adam, right? And then we were brought down to earth. But from Adam and Eve, all of our souls were created. So that's why we have that we come from the loin of Adam, meaning that all of mankind, all of humankind was in that realm already in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge, for lack of better wording.
So we have a real existence before we're here on earth.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and we're going home. That's the whole point of wanting to get to Jannah, man. You want to go home, man. You don't want to stay here.
If we exist, because this is very, very Platonic, if we exist in a reality in Allah's mind before we come here, do we do anything while we're there?
Don't know. There's a realm of souls, and we don't, like I said, we don't delve into what we did, what we did.